Center. I'm GoLocal News editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us for the Noontime News and Politics show heading into the weekend here. I'd like to welcome in Lieutenant Governor candidate Aaron Regunberg. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Kate.
I appreciate your coming in because it's been a busy week nationally, keeping an eye on the Supreme Court, not just their decisions, but the composition. As we know, with the retirement of Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy, there is a lot of concern about a woman's right to choose. Talk with us about, you were probably the first to really get that out there, saying that the General Assembly needs to go back in and address this issue. What have you been hearing from folks?
So across the state, I mean, since Trump's first election 2 years ago, women and activists around Rhode Island have been stepping up, demanding, begging our state leadership to take this crisis seriously. We knew that Roe v. Wade was at acute risk. The establishment continued to say there's nothing to worry about, this isn't at risk, this is just a gesture. But we knew that wasn't true, and we saw that come into crystal clear focus this week with the announced retirement of Supreme Court Justice Kennedy. We know that Republicans in Washington are already mobilizing to attack our rights with another conservative radical justice on the Supreme Court. And the first thing that is going to come into their line of fire is overturning Roe v. Wade. And we also know, I don't think all Rhode Islanders know this, the moment that Roe v. Wade is overturned nationally, a woman's right to choose immediately becomes illegal in the state of Rhode Island because of long, still on the books laws from previous decades. Rhode Island's one of 20 states where that's the case. We have an F from NARAL pro-choice in their state-by-state listings. So we have needed acute emergency action, and this year the legislature again failed women in Rhode Island. We failed to pass the Reproductive Health Care Act, which would codify the protections of Roe v. Wade at the state level. And that's why I put out a call at the moment that Supreme Court Justice Kennedy announces retirement to the Speaker of the House, to the Senate President, to other statewide leaders. Let's reconvene the General Assembly immediately. We need to have an emergency session because we're in an emergency to pass the Reproductive Health Care Act.
Let's talk a little bit about the position, as you just spoke to, of where Rhode Island is nationally. You talk about being one of those 20 states, because there is that question. Can the state really supersede national Supreme Court law if it's on the books? Tell us how that works. I mean, are there other states that there are those protections in place?
So Roe v. Wade created a federal law of the land that abortion, that a woman's right to choose was legal within the parameters of the case law. When Roe v. Wade is overturned, what it means is that decision goes to the states. So it is within our power here in Rhode Island to protect that right to choose for Rhode Island women. The fact is, Rhode Island leaders have not stepped up to take that action yet, despite all of the organizing, all of the protestation, all of the begging that's been going on. And by the way, I think it's worth pointing out, this is not an issue in a vacuum where there's been a failure in the General Assembly. This year, of all years, with women's rights under assault again and again by the Trump administration, the legislature's record has been abysmal. On a women's right to equal pay for equal work, there has been no action. On sexual harassment and rising up to meet the challenges and realities of the Me Too movement, there has been no action. On getting guns out of our schools, which is a movement that has been largely led by women activists and leaders in our state, no action. And of course, passing the Reproductive Health Care Act, no action. So that is unacceptable. And we're seeing across our state community members coming together to say that's unacceptable and to demand better from state leaders, to demand that we immediately reconvene, have an emergency session, and take up the Reproductive Health Care Act.
How forcefully will you continue to push on this issue? We did just see the Assembly adjourn last week. We're heading into the 4th of July holiday. Obviously lobbying personally the House Speaker and the Senate President, clearly a grassroots movement as well. How vociferous is the community going to be in trying to push for the session to come back in? And if we hear from the leaders that for whatever reason they say no, I mean, how hard are you going to push on this issue?
Well, we know we're going to have to push hard. State leaders have already made their choice very clear that they are going to dismiss the calls by women in our state for action on this issue and all of the others that we talked about. So we know that this isn't going to be an easy battle, but the important ones never are. And that's why I think what it's going to take is real sustained organizing and pressure by folks across our state. There was the first action last night. A huge number of people came to the State House to echo that call for an emergency session. That needs to be just the beginning, not the end. And I think that there's a whole lot of of Rhode Islanders who are fired up to make sure that that is just the beginning, and we're going to be hearing a lot more about it in the weeks to come.
Would you say this is pretty high on your list of priorities right now with the assembly business not quite gone away as you're looking for it to go back in, but is this tops on your list?
Absolutely. I mean, this is an issue, it's personal for me. I was very close with my grandmother, who was executive director of her local Planned Parenthood in the years before Roe v. Wade. And so I grew up hearing about the challenges that women went through before we had a national law of the land, before these rights were enshrined. And I think it's really important to point out that overturning Roe v. Wade doesn't end abortions. Abortions have been around since the dawn of time. What this is about is making sure that abortions are safe, healthy, and legal. Because whatever happens legally, this is going to continue to happen. It's about making sure that women have safety, have protections, have health, and that government isn't coming in between a family and the most personal choice that they can make. So I think this is, of course, a top priority of mine. I think it should be a top priority of every state leader in Rhode Island. We are one of the only states in our region that has not codified these rights. Rhode Island is, we're on this list with Texas and Alabama and states like that. It's unacceptable, and it is time for state leaders to admit we failed women, and we need to step up and take real action.
Now, this is just one of the ways a new composition of the Supreme Court can manifest itself. Of course, there's discussions as well, potentially for Ruth Bader Ginsburg to be the next to potentially retire. Under a Trump administration, if he ends up getting his appointments of relatively, if they're on the youngish side, this could be a major shift in the country.
I think a lot of us were hit with this news and felt some real despair, because this is a movement that has the potential to reshape our country for decades and decades to come. For me, when I'm feeling despair, what helps is to focus on what we have control over and to take some concrete action to defend our rights and communities. We know that we have some control on this issue and others at the state level, and that's why we need to step up. We could get into a longer conversation, by the way, about what I would argue, and I think a lot of people are arguing, that having a president that is under criminal investigation currently should not be making a lifetime appointment to a Supreme Court that ultimately there's a very good chance that criminal investigation could go before. So I think there's some very strong questions there that I hope that every Democrat and every patriotic American in Congress is going to be strongly considering and speaking out on, if they're because that's a very real concern.
Well, I appreciate your coming in today to express again your concerns for the state's lack of addressing the Reproductive Health Care Act. You said you had the event at the State House last night. Do you envision more events moving forward of just that show of solidarity and support?
Absolutely, and again, I would want to make clear that this isn't me. This is a broad movement. There was an organization called the Women's Project that organized last night.
Yep.
There are advocates, legislators, folks around our state that are involved in this, and I absolutely envision there's going to be a lot more action. We're talking with a number of organizations about continuing with a continued action and organizing next week, and that's just going to continue. So this is emergency mode. Time's been up for a while, but now that we know the Supreme Court is getting reshaped, time is truly up. We need state action. We can't delay anymore, and that's why I would call again Speaker Mattiello, Senate President Ruggiero. We need action. Bring the session back. Have an emergency legislative session to pass the Reproductive Health Care Act. It is time for our state to step up.
Okay, we're going to keep an eye on the Assembly as it adjourned, but again, Aaron and other community leaders looking to get it back in to address the Reproductive Health Care Act. Aaron, I appreciate your taking the time to come in. I know
Thanks,
it's
Kate.
a busy day. We're going to let Aaron go. We'll be back at Speaking of Actions with our next guest.